Welcome back to the Ditch the Guilt Spotcast. I'm Beth Genly, your host, and today we're welcoming Dr. Ashley Hampton to our interview. Dr. Ashley Hampton is a licensed psychologist, entrepreneurial coach, best-selling author, which is a cool thing, speaker, and the host of the Work Smarter, Live More podcast. As an entrepreneurial coach, she coaches female entrepreneurs to build efficient and sustainable businesses using her proven solopreneur model. So that sounds awesome. That sounds like the kind of thing we all want to know more about. Welcome to the Spotcast, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm really pleased to have you here. And I understand we're going to talk about shoulds today. What's problematic about the word should?
So should is a big word, even though it's just a few letters. It really places a lot of emphasis on someone else's thoughts and someone else's feelings about what you should be doing or what you should look like or what you should be in your personal life, in your business life. But that's all external to you. The biggest problem with that is that we internalize it and believe we have to look a certain way, be a certain way, work in a certain place or in a certain way. And then we tell ourselves that internally. So then our language becomes someone else's and our expectations are someone else's instead of our own.
Okay. So, if I'm living with other people's expectations, shouldn't I do that?
Well, I mean, you could. I think the issue is we take in a lot. We take in what society says we need to be doing, what our partner says we need to be doing, what our boss says we need to be doing. And oftentimes those things don't match our goals. So, for example, I work for myself, but I was never taught growing up that I would be able to work for myself. Not that anybody discouraged it. It was just the society expectation is you grow up, you go to college, you get a degree, and you go to work for someone. Mm-hmm. It doesn't quite work for my personality. It just does not work. So I tried it for a while and I kept clashing. I mean, it just really was this kind of beat my head against the wall thing. Because I was trying to fit into what society says should do versus what really worked best for me and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to show up in the world.
Got it. Okay. So you have mentioned to me that using should leads to success or failure in business or relates to them. And I'm curious what you mean by
that. So along with should, success and failure, sometimes they have a positive connotation, sometimes they have a negative connotation. And people think success is always good and failure is always bad. And that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, interesting. All right. Make a case for that. Okay.
I know, right? I was saying all these controversial things. And that's good because that's the way I operate. So success is great. The problem is, if you haven't defined success for yourself, what do you have? You have someone else's expectation of what you should look like. So, for example, I love working for myself. I haven't had to, but one of my core things is I was willing to take less money in my bank account in order to be able to work for myself and make decisions that I wanted to make. So that's success for me. But if you ask someone else, they're like, oh no, success would never be taking less money. So success becomes that individual construct that you need to do for yourself. Same with failure. So failure along the way, I did not fail at anything until I was an adult. And then, well, I say that, that's not really true. I didn't fail at things I tried. I'm sure there were plenty of things I didn't try that I would have failed at, but I didn't try them, so I didn't fail. Because we're taught that success is what you should be getting out of every experience. So you don't try things that may not work for you. So I didn't really fail big until I got out of graduate school and I was studying for my licensure exam as a psychologist. and I failed the test. Whoa.
Ouch.
Like that
Ouch.
was, yeah, it literally felt like somebody punched me in the gut. Which I have had happen before because I took Taekwondo for several years. So I know what that feels like. Like it just knocks the wind out of you to get that email. So not only did that happen one time, it happened 3 times before I passed on the 4th time.
Oh.
So yeah, right. And
after getting all the way through grad school
right.
and passing zillions of tests, right?
Right. And I was working. Like I was a psychologist already. I was working. I was doing all this stuff. Like I had a real job for someone else. And I was doing all of these things. Like I was evaluating patients. I was treating patients. I was testifying in court. Like I was doing all this stuff I wanted to do, but I couldn't pass this test. So someone else's version of failure, and my version of failure at that point was, I didn't pass the test, I'm a failure. Well, now I know after that experience and multiple times failing at that test, that would have been a failure if I had stopped and quit. But because I kept going, I eventually saw success. So that's my version of failure is, okay, I may have failed at one thing or one piece of something, but now I need to revamp how I'm doing things and move forward. So one piece of that is you have to define success and failure for yourself. The second piece of it is usually defined for us. So that's where our shoulds come in. You should pass that test on the first try if you're a good psychologist. I was a great psychologist. I mean, I still am, but like I was treating patients were having good results. Like there was no issue there. There was no issue at work, but I wasn't passing this test. The reason is I'm a terrible test taker. I always have been. It just is the way it is. So I had to learn the test strategies that I think maybe people learn early on. I just didn't know them. So I eventually learned them. And I eventually passed by 2 questions, and that was enough because I only had to pass by 1. So, but that's the other thing is people say, well, you should have gotten a better score. Why? I passed. It didn't matter at that point. Like you should back off because I passed. So that was good enough. It's just like shoulds create unrealistic expectations that we may not feel are right for us. So do other people's successes and failures and their view of what should be considered a success and failure. So that's something to also kind of pull back and say, okay, is this success for me? Is this what I want? Is this really what makes me feel good? Or is this like a piece of failure? Okay, it didn't work out so great. And now I need to learn from that and move on. And take the next step and just revamp some things. You learned either way, so I feel as if you should embrace failure and move on, and try again. But that's not generally the society's accepted idea of how things work.
I'm just fascinated by the piece of your story that you said that you didn't fail at anything till after grad school because you never tried anything that you could have failed at, which is pretty much my story too. Right. And I think that a lot of us who are, I don't know if it's type A or just that we have so many shoulds in our brain that about how we should look and how we should perform, that we're pretty careful. I read this wonderful sentence that I underlined a million times in a novel that I read a while back. Success takes no chances with itself. Perfection takes no chances with itself.
Totally.
Right? And that means that you don't get a chance to reach for something big that you don't know if you'll hit or not, because that building that kind of resilience around failing is a skill, a set of skills even. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair way to kind of sum up what you were trying to say?
Oh, I totally agree. Yes. Okay. And I mean, you have to just learn and move forward. Nothing really bad happened to me when I failed that test, other than, I had to make some decisions because of the real life shoulds that come along with not passing something like that. But in the end, that was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago now. I mean, it's a story I tell. It's not anything that's really negatively impacted my life. It just happened and I learned from it. And now I make different decisions because of it, but really nothing bad, quote unquote, happened. So yeah, it's, to me, learning from that and learning how to fail gracefully, if that's the word that you want to use, is a good skill to learn even as an adult.
All right. So if shoulding on myself is not a great thing to do, how do I get it out of my vocabulary and out of my kind of mental landscape?
There's a couple of things. So I have the 4 R's that I like to use as kind of a framework for doing this whole should we not discussion. So the first one, and what you're referring to, is just recognize. You have to recognize that you're saying it. And there's 2 ways that you say it. You say it to yourself internally, and you're talking to yourself like, oh, I should have done that. I should have been faster. I should have called them back. I should have been nicer. I should have done this. So it's an internal like monologue that you're having with yourself. Mm-hmm. There's also some external things that you're saying to people and or people are saying to you. You should take that job because you should, like in my case, personal example, like you should be married. I'm single. So I choose to be single at this point. Like that's just the way I want to live my life right now. Or you should have kids. I don't have the resources at this point, in my opinion, to have kids and be effective at raising children. So I don't have any right now. I have a cat and that's great. Like that works for me. I'm perfectly happy with that. But I hear it all the time and I still hear it, even though I'm very vocal about being single, having a cat, like no 2-legged kids. People say, but you should have kids. Like, who's going to love you? I don't know, me. Like it goes from one extreme to the other. But that's what's really impacting us, like that's what we hear. We hear it from ourselves. We hear it from other people. We then internalize some of that we hear from other people and start saying it to ourselves. And then society as a whole has this framework of you should have, you should be married and you should have 2.5 kids and a white picket fence. And that's changing, it's changed a little bit since I've grown up, thankfully, but it's still there. And that is then placed in our brains. And, we're growing up thinking that we're doing something wrong if we haven't done what everyone expects of us, which is a should. Like what you should do is, so that's first thing you got to do is recognize it.
Okay. All right. So become aware that it's happening in your brain or in your environment and say, oh, there it is. There's that nasty should. Okay.
Right. Exactly. So the second part, you have to remove it. So instead of saying, like, let's say I'm saying to myself, like, I should have walked that mile faster.
You should have what?
Walked the mile faster. Like every morning I walk.
Okay.
And sometimes I'm processing like business things. Sometimes I'm listening to podcasts. Sometimes I'm listening to summits, things like this. And sometimes I'll catch myself saying like, you should have walked faster. You could have gotten more steps in if you would have walked faster. I'm not running a race. I'm just walking. Mm-hmm. So I'm walking for exercise. Like it doesn't matter how fast I walk. It's more steps. It's more movement. So I then have to like remove that. Like there is no should. Stop. Just no should. So I've recognized that I said it to myself and I have to stop and say, no, I'm going to remove that from my language. That's the first thing. Okay. And it has to happen internally if that inner monologue, and it also has to happen externally. Like I can't then turn around and say to you, well, you should walk faster. I have to stop saying it completely. So I have to remove it from my language.
That sounds like if I have to stop saying it completely, that I need to get the help of the people I talk to to say, this is something that's coming
Sometimes,
out of my language. Can you just
yeah,
wave at me or something if you hear that word?
sometimes. And sometimes we don't realize that we're doing it. And with the kind of the recognizing, you'll start to hear, oh, I just said that. Okay. All right. So I've recognized it, and you won't catch it every time. And that's okay. You don't have to catch it every time, but you'll start catching it more and more.
Mhm.
And if you do have a dialogue with people that you talk with most, like, hey, I don't want to really say this anymore. This is not serving me. I feel like it's not serving you. Let's have a better conversation. Let's be more open about this. So if I hear it in myself, I'm going to stop and reword what I'm saying. If you hear it, stop me. And that's a very effective way of stopping really any habit that you have, especially something that you're saying that you don't want to say anymore because it's not working for you.
Beautiful. Okay. So far we've got recognize and remove. What's the next one?
Replace. So you
Okay.
have to replace something. Like, instead of telling yourself, I should have walked faster, I could have walked faster, but I was listening. I was really in my head about what I was doing. And there's really no reason why I had to walk faster. I was processing something and it slowed me down. Okay, no problem. I now know how I want to move forward with this problem. Or, you know, like with my personal example, you should be married. I could be married, but I choose not to be.
Mhm.
And that's a very subtle difference. But if you try it on, it really feels different. You should be married is how someone's telling you to be. I could be married, but I choose not to, gives me the choice. It takes like all the responsibility away from them and gives me the ability to say how I want to do things.
I'm curious about this one because what I didn't hear you say was, I should not be married because of my resources, because of the situation in my life, because of how much I'm enjoying the way I am right now. I should not be married. You didn't choose that phraseology. You chose I could be and I choose not to. And I'm curious why you went, because it would be so easy to just replace should with should not.
But then that's somebody else's expectations. You're still working off of them. So instead of taking in their stuff, you're replacing it with what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I choose not to be married. That's my choice. I guess I could be. I probably could have married some of my terrible ex-boyfriends in the past, but that's not what I wanted to do. And it didn't work for me. So a lot of this is taking responsibility and ownership, but a lot of it really is standing true in your voice and how you want to show up. So that to me is very empowering. And how I would like to see people show up more is, really standing in their power and their truth. And so that's why I just completely eliminate it. Should or should not, completely eliminate it.
Okay,
And replace it
beautiful.
with
Thanks
something
for
better.
clarifying that. I think that's a really
Yeah,
important point there.
it is. You're exactly
Okay.
right.
Okay, so we've got recognize, remove, replace,
Mhm.
and
Repeat.
repeat. Okay.
That's the easy
And
one.
rinse. I assume
Yeah,
rinse and repeat.
yes, exactly. Totally rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that I find myself doing sometimes, because sometimes I slip and I move back into thinking like, oh, I should be. Like I really did say to myself, I think it was last week, I should have walked faster. I could have gotten more steps because I try to get 10,000 steps a day. That's my new goal. But so sometimes I do slip back, but it really wasn't necessary. So, is that repeat part, like, okay, I'm doing it again. I've got to stop. Usually now it's an internal thing for me is I slip back into an old pattern and I have to stop myself, have a little discussion. This is not where we're going to go. We finished that. Now we have to move forward. And that's the repeat part, is just being mindful of it when it happens again. And usually once you get it out of your verbal, like out loud language, it's usually going to only come back in your internal language, because that's some of those things that you haven't gotten rid of yet from the past.
That's a really good hint right there. I think that we can be sort of blindsided by our own internal dialogue sometimes.
Right.
And,
totally.
and to catch it, which takes us back, we've rinsed and repeated, we're back at recognize again.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just a cycle. And it really, it kind of makes things easier the second and third time. I've been doing this, let's see, 6.5 years now. And I've almost eliminated it from my language, but I can hear it when I go out places, like, I used to work in a prison, so my ears are still pretty tuned in to hear other things, even though I don't mean to do it. And so I'll hear people say, well, like, you should have done that. And I want to go, no, don't say that. Don't say that. Like, you don't know what they should have done. You weren't there. You weren't them, whatever. That's that person's expectations placed on someone else. But I hear it a lot, and it makes me more mindful of what I say to other people, and then how it makes me feel when I hear that, even if it's not directed at me. So that's the other piece for me is the feelings part of, like, okay, I kind of feel crummy when I hear that, or when somebody tells me, like, you should be doing something, and it's totally not what I want to do or how I'm going to do it. If it's a really good piece of advice in terms of, like, this person is in front of me in business, they're like 3 or 4 steps in front of me, and they're like, oh, well, you should do this. I'll consider it. That's a little different from the part of you should be married. Like, that's an expectation. The other piece is like a piece of advice that I could take or not take. So sometimes that one doesn't bother me as much. The expectation of somebody else on how I should live or how I should do business is sometimes the problem for me. Like, I just feel bad, and it makes me feel guilty that I'm doing it some way that I choose. So I choose not to live in that world anymore. And it helps me ditch the guilt.
Uh-huh. So I was going to ask you, let's tie these shoulds into the guilt, and you just did that beautifully. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's just a way to really let go of those things that you've heard all of your life, like, you should do this or you should do this. And then you grow up thinking, well, I didn't do that, and they said I should, and so now I feel guilty because I didn't. And like, what are they going to think, and how are they going to feel about me, and are they going to accept me or not? And sometimes it becomes an issue. My grandmother didn't do this, but I have a friend who, her grandma was like, oh, you should grow up and be married and have a family, and that didn't happen before her grandmother passed away. And so it's always like, well, was she proud of me, or was she disappointed because she had these expectations for me that she didn't get to see? And so that, to me, just feels very scary. And so that's one way that I think we can all kind of ditch the guilt, is removing that expectation from someone else from what we think we need to do.
It occurs to me that there's other language around it, and you just kind of said it. Sometimes what I hear instead of you should is you need to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another piece of it is catching you should when it shows up in disguise.
Oh, that's a good one. So there is a big difference between the word need and the word want.
Uh-huh.
And you're right. Should often comes wrapped up in a pretty bow under the word need. You need to do this. You need to do that. It's one of those instructive words that really, again, places the expectations that someone else is going to tell you what to do. Great if you're a child and you're listening to your parent tell you, like, not to run into the street. When you're an adult and you can figure it out for yourself, sometimes you just have to do that, even if you have a little bump in the road. But that's also one of those words that you have to be very careful with. I hear a lot of people say, well, I need, like ordering food, for example, I need a burger and fries. No, you don't need a burger and fries. You want a burger and fries, or you would like to have a burger and fries. It's a very nuanced way in communicating, but a very clear way to communicate. If you can remove some of these words that don't really mean anything. A should doesn't really mean anything to you. Need doesn't really mean anything to you. You want something. You need air and water and sleep. We can argue about sleep, I guess. But you really need.
I won't.
I know, right? You only really need a few things. You want other things, and that makes things a lot clearer in terms of expectations. So it becomes a much clearer way to communicate, in a way that I think you can be, you can feel good about, instead of feeling negative emotions. So sadness, guilt, worry that people, that you're going to let people down, or nervous about how you're going to act with people because you're doing something different. So those are the big pieces for me, is communicating more clearly. And that's what these words prevent us from being able to do.
Well, communicating more clearly, whether it's business or personal, is just going to serve us and the people around us much better than any other way, for sure.
Definitely.
So I bet some people have been taking notes on all this, but I understand you have even more details in your handout that you're offering folks.
Yes, we are going to go through the 4 R's again. So you'll have a handy handout that you can pull out anytime you need. Has several examples. I will, you guys will have it, right? You'll have
the URL that people can sign up for it. So yeah.
Perfect. So it'll have all of that. It'll have contact information for me if you want to contact me and have a further conversation about it. But it does go into the feelings a little bit about, how you can replace things and how you can have a conversation with someone, kind of like we were talking about, like, okay, how do you handle this? Or how do you figure out that you're doing it? Like, how do you even know that you're placing your expectations on someone else? So there's some ideas about things that you can look out for. And of course, the 4 R's, a few examples in there, and a few ideas of different words that you can use instead of should. Because most people, like, it's kind of a foreign concept for some people to delete that word from their vocabulary. And they think, well, what will I do instead? What else can I say? So there's some ideas in there as well. And then feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I will be more than happy to answer them.
That's beautiful, Dr. Ashley. Thank you so much today. This has been a really unique, out of all our different speakers, it's been a unique way to come at the question of guilt. Extremely useful. And I love the way you organized it into the 4 R's. So I'm very pleased to have you join us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great. I appreciate you inviting me to be here, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers as well.
Oh, excellent. Thanks. Have a great day.